Welcome to today's webinar on supporting authentic learning with Jay McTighe and Carol Tomlinson. I'm sure that you're as excited as I am to hear from these master 200 participants. And as we go through, if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat and I will make sure we get to them when we have time at the end. So any questions you have or comments you would like to make, please include them in the chat. So Jay and Carol, I'm up over 300, so far so good. We'll just wait another minute or so. Okay, it's a minute and a half past time we're supposed to start. And I don't want to waste any valuable time with the people that we have, our experts today. I'm Cindy Moss, the VP of Innovation for Defined Learning. And today you are very privileged. You're going to hear from Jay McTighe, the mastermind of Understanding by Design, amazing author, PD presenter, and Carol Tomlinson, the guru of differentiation. These two folks are experts in the kinds of strategies that teachers need to use to engage all types of learners. And we at Defined Learning provide a library of more than 366 PBLs, pre-K-12, that are already state standards aligned. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, and then he's turning it over to Carol Ann. So as you guys, as we go through, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So take it away, Jay.
Great. Thank you, Cindy. Hello to everyone who's viewing us. It's a joy for me to work with my longtime friend, Carol Ann Tomlinson. I'm also a longtime fan of Defined Learning. I think they have just a very unique set of resources. And our comments today will relate, I think, to DL. Oops, pardon me. I don't know what happened on that. Okay, let me try this again. Sorry. Are you seeing my full screen now, Cindy? Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. I'm going to begin this session for about 20 minutes or so and turn it over to Carol for an additional 20 minutes, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. Since the focus of this webinar is on, quote, authentic learning, which is a hallmark of Defined Learning, I'm going to limit my remarks to that topic, or try to, and I'm drawing my ideas from three interrelated sources: a recent book that I co-authored on designing authentic performance tests and projects, my work over the years with Grant Wiggins on Understanding by Design, and a best-selling book that Carol and I co-authored, which integrates her ideas of differentiation with the ideas of UBD. So these are some sources. So let me begin by putting forth something that I have been a long advocate for, and that is different goals for learning. And I like to call these goals for modern learning. There are three, categorically, I would propose three goals that are interrelated but not identical. There are what Grant Wiggins and I have called acquisition goals. Simply put, what knowledge and skills should students acquire as they're engaged in new learning? And this, of course, is what all teaching is about. And standards specify knowledge and skills, what students should know and do. But we also can identify what I've have called understanding goals. An understanding goal is more than just knowing factual information or having a basic skill. It refers to a conceptual understanding of bigger ideas, concepts, and principles, but also understanding of process, be it research, problem solving, design thinking, and so on. There are understandings that undergird process. And a third interrelated but not identical goal is transfer. The ability of the student to take what was learned in one situation and be able to see its application and effectively apply it in a somewhat different situation. So these are not unique. We're familiar with these goal types, but my contention is a modern education should ultimately be preparing students to transfer their learning. but you can't transfer something that you don't understand. And so, to me, a modern education starts by building knowledge and skill foundation. Those are basics, but not stopping there, continuing to design curriculum and learning experiences and even assessments that get us to understanding and transfer. The importance of, and the distinction among these goals, I'll say, is that they influence how kids learn. How kids learn and remember factual information is not identical to how they develop skill proficiency. That has implications for how we teach, and these distinctions also matter for how we assess. If I want to see if a student knows something, an objective test or quiz or question will tell me that, because knowledge is binary. You know it or you don't. Whereas if I want to see if a student is developing proficiency in a skill or is able to transfer their learning, I think in general, a more performance-based approach to assessment is needed. And we don't rate a skill or transfer as right or wrong. We think of it along a continuum from novice to expert. So these distinctions matter for teaching, learning, and assessing. Are any of you familiar with the name John Hattie, Hattie? You may be familiar with his work. He's written a now fairly famous book called Visible Learning. Well, John Hattie is a researcher from New Zealand, has spent entire career, 35 plus years, studying teaching and learning, and has put forth what he calls the effect sizes of various teaching techniques. But what I want to share with you through the visual is an article that John sent me a couple of years ago. And in the article, he said, or essentially said, in my work studying teaching and learning for my whole career, I've determined that we can think about 3 levels of learning. John said there's surface level learning, typified by teachers covering material, presenting it to students, or perhaps they read it in a book or view it online. But John reminds us if kids don't do anything with that information or that new material, it can remain on the surface and over time fade from memory. Then John says there's deep learning, which he defines, as I do, as learning with and for understanding, where you come to understand larger conceptual ideas and processes. Deep learning endures. It does not fade away. And then Hattie says the deepest learning is evident when students can transfer, when they can apply their learning to something that they haven't seen before. So this is one of our most noteworthy researchers in our profession, highlighting points that Grant, Wiggins, and Carol and I have espoused for many years. So because defined learning is such a good resource for performance tests and projects, authentic tests and projects, to me, it's a perfect resource to use to help develop deep learning and to engage students in applying that learning through transfer. So I've written a lot about performance tasks over the years. Here is a summary of my working definition. For me, a performance task is any learning activity or experience, and it can also serve as an assessment where students are asked to perform with their learning, to apply their learning to some situation. And as we know, performance tasks typically yield a tangible product and or performance. It might be a written product, it might be visual, it might be 3D, such as a model, or performances, including oral, multimedia, and so forth. So permit me just to share a few examples. I suspect these are familiar to many people viewing, but here are a few examples. And I ask you, when you look at these performance tasks, to think about what do they have in common? What are students being asked to do? As assessments, how do these differ from typical multiple choice tests with correct answers? So this example comes and could be used in conjunction with a study of a state, a province, a region, or a country for that matter. Here's a contemporary and very authentic task. By the way, Carol Tomlinson and I work with a woman in India who does puts on webinars for international school educators. And I was on an early webinar with her this morning, and she told me that the coronavirus infection rate has dropped dramatically in the last 6 weeks in India, where earlier this year it was a huge crisis of rapid infection. So it would be interesting to analyze what factors were causing that significant drop and how does it compare to other places. This is authentic application of learning. We'll skip this one. So here's an example of a performance task for language arts. And here's one more that actually is derived from defined learning. This is one of their wonderful tasks of design thinking. So Carol and I could show you dozens more, and defined learning could show you hundreds of these. But let's think about what do these kinds of tasks have in common. And for me, authentic tasks have identifiable elements. They call for students to apply learning. They set up a realistic or meaningful context. Now, admittedly, some of them are simulations. Imagine you've been asked by the state tourist agency to develop a tour, or imagine you're a backpack designer. But even if they're not, quote, real, they replicate or reflect how people outside of school use knowledge and skills. There's a purpose for the student in the task or a goal they're working toward. There's a target audience. It might be simulated. Imagine that you are presenting to the backpack manufacturer. But nonetheless, it replicates the thinking that people outside of school use. There are realistic constraints in good performance tasks. Constraints such as budget, word count, things that we have to navigate in our own lives. And ultimately, students make or do something, a product or performance. And the product or performances that they produce serve as evidence of learning. Hence, we can use performance tasks not only as rich learning activities, but as assessments. So one of the tools that Grant Wiggins and I developed many years ago, and some of you I know are familiar with this, is an acronym called GRASPS. And defined learning uses GRASPS in the creation of its many wonderful tasks. Again, some of you are familiar with this, but if you're not, just look at the letters of the acronym and you can hopefully see how this could be used to help construct an authentic task. And my experience is often teachers can take learning activities that they may have used for years or a performance type task that they've used, but perhaps they never had an audience or there was never a goal for the student other than do it because it's your assignment. So you can enhance often performance tasks using the GRASPS elements. Grant Wiggins and I have published idea sheets that go along with GRASP just to spark ideas. So here is a short version, but an example of roles and or audiences that might be appropriate for performance tasks. In fact, every one of the ideas on the screen was derived from teacher developed tasks, albeit in different subjects and grade levels. And what I found is simply looking at the list can spark idea. Tour guide, that was the genesis of the state tour task that I showed you earlier. Or literary critic. Maybe we'll have the kids do a book review and post it onto a kid's book review site, serving as literary critics. Much more authentic than doing a traditional book report, I would say. Similarly, we have a number of options for the P of grasps, the products or performances. Once again, here is a short list of possibilities. These options give us a chance to give kids some voice and choice. And something I know Carol will talk more about in terms of how are we responsive to the individuals we serve. And I will let her pick up in a moment in that regard. So GRASP is simply a tool that can be used to create more authentic context for performance tasks. And Defined Learning has used GRASP. You'll recognize the GRASP elements in their tasks. All right, let me wrap up my portion of this webinar with one more thought about authenticity. The term authentic, I believe, can be thought of using in two ways or two connotations of the term. The most common connotation is the one in which I've been using, and I think we tend to think about it, is we present students with situations or tasks or opportunities that reflect, quote, real world application. So how do people outside of school use knowledge and skills? And those are authentic situations. But here's a second connotation that I think is equally worthy and worth attending to as much as possible. And that is trying to connect the tasks to the interests and experiences of the learners we serve. And to me, the best tasks, connect those two dimensions of authenticity. It's not always possible given the content we teach, but it's a worthy endeavor. And the two are not always conjoined. I have seen authentic tasks that are so far from kids' interests or experiences that they're not engaged by the task. But the best tasks engage students with realistic applications of learning. So there's more to say about all this, but I don't want to exceed my time. So I'm going to stop my screen share and turn this over to Carol to continue some thoughts about authentic learning. And I'm seeing if Carol is there.
See, I was watching your authentic descriptors of authenticity and thinking in my head where I was going with that, and I didn't realize you were stopping quite so soon.
Yeah, I went a little quick. Sorry.
Okay, that's great. Not a problem. Thank you very much. Let me share my slides here now. Okay, almost good to go. Great. Thanks to you again, as everyone has said, for being here this afternoon. It's an honor to spend time with you, and I hope you find that it's time that generates new thinking and also affirms some older thinking for you. Jay and I have been buddies in presentation and career paths for a long time. Our thinking and our career trajectories are very surprisingly much the same, really. And so when I speak with Jay as a partner, I often find myself feeling a little bit like Jay's echo chamber, because we see the act of teaching and learning so similarly. But what I'm going to do, which is very similar to what he's done, but with really a different emphasis, I think, is talk with you a little bit about authentic learning as that relates to the major thrust of differentiation, which I'll suggest here with you in a minute. So while Jay is talking with you with an emphasis on curriculum and authentic learning and some background ideas about instruction or assessment and that kind of thing, I'm going to move into the foreground of instruction with what I'm talking about. I want to begin by saying to you that I have understood for a long time that differentiation is not as much a set of instructional strategies as it is a way of being in the classroom, a way of seeing yourself, a way of seeing kids, a way of seeing them together, a way of thinking about teaching and learning. It's really much more a philosophy or a framework or an outlook in that way than it is a set of instructional strategies. Though I still find when I have the chance to present to teachers, what folks are really hungry for is just show me 2 or 3 strategies that I can use and I'll go differentiate. I hope that what I show you this afternoon is a slightly broader view of that. Differentiation asks us to create communities. Let me make sure I'm going in the right place here. Create communities of respect and collaboration. It asks us not to let kids come in classrooms and sit and do their own thing and listen to us and largely get up and leave, and that's what school is, but to help them see each other as teammates in the classroom and in teammates in many endeavors outside of the classroom. That's appealing to me because I think it's better for kids. My experience says that it works much better, but research says that for us as well. Still, though, in a lot of classrooms, rather than there being a team of learners working together with the teacher as sort of the head learner in there, we still see classrooms that work with this approach. The teacher is in charge, and as you can see on the graphic, has big, broad, capital, bold letters, and on the bottom, sort of subserviently, are the students. The teacher sees classroom management as trying to control the kids so that the right things happen. We often see teaching as telling, and we feel like we're only authentic teachers when we're telling. We see instruction largely as practice and drill, and we tend to see assessment as judging. On the other hand, the job of students, rather than working with those elements, is to comply, to pay attention, and to retain what they've been told, at least until the test is over. That, to me, is a very ancient and inappropriate way of teaching, and yet our habits are so strong that there's gravitational pull in that direction. Differentiation, and I think most of the research we have, suggests that it's better if we think about classrooms in this way. Teacher and student still seem to have about the same weight in terms of the typeface here. Teacher has more responsibility. That's our job. It's our profession to make things work. That doesn't mean we are the doers of it all or that the student shouldn't be deeply involved. But I think this more contemporary, more defensible way of teaching also suggests some different things about what these classroom elements mean. Curriculum is not something you cover. It's a process of meaning making. And so I'm echoing Jay here rather profoundly. Instruction is not about telling. It's about facilitating learning. Assessment is not really about judging. It's about charting a course for the kid and for me. And management isn't about control. It's about leading for success. I'm saying this to you because this is a reason for me that project-based learning, problem-based learning, inquiry, a number of approaches that live under that same tent, get my vote in terms of good ways to go for kids, because project-based learning has a vastly greater potential to reach the swath of today's learners in ways that will positively impact their lives for the rest of their lives. Differentiation also asks us to teach up. Not only does it say we need to be working together as a team, and the kids need to feel like a team with each other, and the teacher and the kids need to feel like a team, but don't decide that some kids can learn and some kids can't learn so well, and teach up to those kids that we think have capacity and remediate or teach down to others. Teaching up suggests that everybody, as Jay would tell you, should be focused on the essential understandings, the big ideas, making sense of those, transferring what they've learned, and that really belongs to everybody. It's the ultimate equity compliment that we pay to people. What does it mean to teach up? It means that everybody's work has very clear knowledge, understanding, and skills goals, what Jay and am I okay, or is somebody trying to tell me something? Okay, I guess I'm okay. Jay would say that the essential knowledge, the essential understandings, and the essential skills belong to everybody. And I think for both Jay and me, the exclamation point there goes with the understandings. Everybody should be understanding, working to understand, integrating their own experiences into the understanding. Everybody's work should require careful thinking, should focus on understanding, not just do that every once in a while. It should present kids with problems to solve, issues to address, should invite kids to use the most important knowledge and skills to explore or extend or challenge those understandings. It's authentic, as Jay said, and authentic to me means much of what he said. It's real world, but it's also important to that child. It aligns with that kid's experiences in life. We require all kids to support ideas, to explain, to apply, to evaluate, to transfer. When we set success criteria, our baseline is meets expectations. That's the least that we're going to expect from anybody. Our work requires everyone to be metacognitive, to reflect, to plan, and to evaluate. And so what teaching up really means to me is you plan first for high-end challenge, and then scaffold and support the broad array of range of students that you have to be able to succeed with that degree of complexity. I think project-based learning does that. I think project-based learning, and particularly what I know of the work that Defined Learning has put together, teaches up. It's the way that we would want kids who are really good in math or science or in any of the other areas to be working. And so in that way, it gives us a much more promising palette for teaching and learning than many of the more traditional approaches that we still see in our classrooms often. But that's the case, and this is my punchline, so this is where I'm really heading into the presentation. That promise of something like project-based learning is only going to work as it should if the teacher is planning for the full array of strengths and needs of every learner in that class. Just because there is more opportunity for movement and perhaps some more opportunity for choice, and just because the work is more engaging, doesn't mean it's going to automatically work for everybody, because it clearly is not, as you know if you've taught. Here's another challenge of differentiation. It asks us to teach the student and not just the students. I was fascinated and dismayed when I first went to the university and started working with some research teams, interviewing teachers for a large, hairy, complicated project we were working on. The project was really focused on looking at each kid and trying to determine where that student was coming from and what they brought to the class with them and what would be of greatest assistance. We ended up with notebooks of notes stacked taller than a person, asking the teacher questions that related to that. And I think it would be accurate to say in all those notes, we didn't ever see a single teacher, but certainly not many, refer to a student. It was always the kids like this, the kids can't do this, the kids are restless when we do this. A class can't learn. an individual brain has to learn. And unless we're trying really hard, imperfectly, but really hard, to reach that brain, to understand that human being, we're not headed where we need to be. So if you think about a really beautifully designed project-based learning framework, what about these kids? I don't know about you, but I know the names of these kids that I taught over a period of many years. And school doesn't just click for them. And paradoxically, in some way, that sort of formulaic teaching, we're going to all do this together and complete this worksheet and then check it together and then move on, is actually almost easier for this kind of kid than an open inquiry-based sort of approach, because that other space is more ambiguous. It's more challenging, potentially, more enlightening, more appealing, but also scary. So differentiation says, not only do we need to see the student, but to make something as powerful as project-based learning powerful for every kid, we need to look for the full potential of every learner. No labels, no limits, no falling into that human thing of saying, look, he just can't do this much. Or she can't sit still and there's just no way she can follow these directions. Or I'm really giving this my best shot, but he's a case to work with. This is a Carol Dweck thing. And I think many of us as teachers, and probably most of you who are here today, find it appealing and a worthwhile goal to say, I get up every day intending to teach with a growth mindset. I may go to bed a lot of nights knowing I didn't make it, but I also know I'll get up the next day recharged and ready to try again. But teaching with a growth mindset requires several things of us for it to work. Carol Dweck says clearly we have to show a firm belief in the student's capacity to succeed. And I think we can only show that truly if we believe that truly. Jay used a picture of an iceberg. I like thinking about that in terms of the kid too. We see a tiny bit of evidence of what the student can do in front of us in the classroom, but so much of it is submerged below the surface. If we have that belief, then what that says is I'm committed to helping this student succeed. Not I believe he can do it on his own, but I'm committed to that. And what that means is that we have accepted the responsibility of meeting that student where he or she is and scaffolding that student's success to the next level, just up one step from where he is right now, and up to the next step, and then up to the next step. That's what Dylan William calls +1 learning. Teacher's job is to come up to school every day and say, I'm doing my very best to understand where this student is and moving forward one level today, one chunk, one skill, one insight, one whatever. And it also means that we have to teach the students the skills of success. Really, a lot of students don't understand how to formulate a question, how to read a rubric, how to analyze the piece of work they've just done according to criteria for success, how to talk themselves into sticking into the game when they're really discouraged or tired or don't feel well. I think to have project-based learning have its full potential, teachers have to go into it with these 3 intentions firmly in mind. I don't know a perfect teacher. I think that's not a very good goal. But a teacher who won't quit working in these directions is in a place, combined with something like project-based learning that's really well done, to take a kid into places they never thought they could go. What that means is then that we have to know the student's strengths and build on those strengths. Strength-based learning is huge. We have to know their needs. We have to know how they go about learning and what they do when they get stuck and what excites them. Have to know their interests. I think these are interesting little graphics with different people putting into pictures what that notion of strength-based or interest-based stuff looks like. There are many ways that we can conceive that. Project-based learning, again, is so powerful in that it enables us to draw on these things in kids. If we take that plan, which is a curriculum piece, and take it into the instructional realm and implement it appropriately. We have to build on their strengths and interests. And so that may mean a beautiful problem-based learning that you find at a place like Defined Learning or that you and your colleagues have created has some very interesting stuff in it. But if it never gets around to building on that student's strengths or that student's interests, needs to be stretched and have a few little holes poked in it to make that possible. But it's also really important to understand each kid's learning gaps, because so many kids in our classrooms have learning gaps. And over the years, they get more and more hidden and more complicated. In a classroom, again, where we kind of go lockstep, it's easy to say, okay, well, then this time period today, this one I'm going to teach this thing. Even if I have one group doing one thing and one another, I can see that right here is my time to do that. But when you're working with something like project-based learning, which can be, doesn't have to be, but can be a little bit more amorphous in its sense of schedule, sometimes can be hard to figure out when we're going to help that student who's 12 or 14 or 16 and really can't yet read the books that we're asking them to use as resources. Lots of ways to scaffold student success, and I'm going to pop through these quickly because you know many of them and can look at them again, but lots of ways we can help them move +1. And by the way, that was John Hattie, not Dylan William, that has the +1 thing. John Hattie says our job is to go to school every day and do +1 teaching for each student. And all of those things are things that we can do in a project-based learning format. And so the question is, when we take that really nice plan that we've been given, again, I would say that not all project-based learning is created equal either, but when you get a really fine plan, like the ones I have seen from Defined Learning, it's not going to work appropriately for the student unless we're looking for the different needs and strengths and building on those. So differentiation suggests that we plan our time in terms of highways when all of us need to be together as a class. This is a place where we are going to talk about, make decisions on, review things as a group. But that we also have built-in times for exit ramps so that we know when there's a time to work with a second language student who needs some academic vocabulary, so that we know when we're going to take the time to help a student map out a timeline for himself. It doesn't mean we'll do the timelines all together on the highway, because there are kids who don't need our help in that at all. It means using these two things in counterbalance with each other through pretty much all the things that we did. I love this picture, so I thought I needed to use it for something. Isn't that the coolest piece of corn you've ever seen? It's an actual piece of corn. It's a Native American crop. but it's a great visual metaphor for our classrooms today. And so my challenge to you is, when you find wonderfully delineated curriculum that really sort of gives me a tingle when I look at it because it's so nice, to remember that the neatness ends there, the tidiness ends there. It can be a work of art on a piece of paper, and then all these kids come into the classroom, and it is not going to have the power that it needs to unless we're applying it in connection with the kids. So a few challenges: seeking ways always to know the student better, placing the student at the core of all of our decisions, creating an environment of unconditional positive regard. We accept one another with optimism and willingness to pull together. You don't have to be something different or something certain to get our approval. Building teams of students, student-student, teacher-student connections. Connecting content with kids, which is a subtitle Jay and I use for a book, but with each kid, not just with the students, but with the student. Following students' growth trajectories, academic, affective, and social, and then using what we learn to make our next instructional cycle better. Balancing flexibility and predictability in the classroom. Focusing on individual growth rather than only or largely on a single standard of excellence. Connecting with multiple cultures and languages. Offering multiple modes of expression. And one of the hardest and most important things we can do as a teacher, teaching forward, helping the kids move in the direction that we need to go, and simultaneously teaching kids who need us to do it backwards, going back to take care of essential things that they've never conquered in the past. Teaching up, and remembering that one size fits all project-based learning is likely to fail the very same students that school nearly always fails, unless we can focus what we're doing on the individual student as well as on the group. So Cindy, that's the end of me, and I will stop my sharing so you can add your slides here.
Okay. All right, my desktop. Well, there was lots of conversation going on. Lots of good questions and comments. And let's look again and see, Jay and Carolyn, you guys are finished now. You can look and see. Let's see if there are anything's in chat. Lots of people are saying thank you. And I love the way everything was so positive. And people are saying it was truly informative, great nuggets, great information. Thanks for all the ideas. And people are talking about they're using defined learning. While I'm looking for some more questions, if you have never looked at defined learning, we would be happy to have a call with you and go through how it can provide you lots of PBLs that you can customize so that you don't have to do all the hard work of creating everything from the beginning. And then you can just modify them to better meet the needs of your students. People are saying they're feeling inspired, they're excited to share.
Cindy?
Yes.
I have one comment I'd like to throw in, even though it wasn't a question.
It's okay.
If we have a few minutes.
Yes, go ahead.
So sometimes people ask the question, well, how is a performance test different from a project as in PBL? And my view has always been that you can think about the two, rather than two different things, along a series of continua. So for example, one dimension is how much time will the task or project take? And as a general observation, I found that performance tasks tend to be shorter, often more teacher-directed, and in many cases, subject-specific. Whereas you move along those continua, and project-based learning, projects tend to be longer term in terms of time, often multidisciplinary, and often more student-directed. So I mentioned this to say, because since there were several questions about how do you get started or how do you convince skeptical teachers that they can do this? Or what about secondary teachers with 150 kids a day? I like to suggest starting with shorter, more teacher-directed and maybe subject-specific tasks, just to get away from everything is teacher-directed and everything is kind of do the chapter questions at the end, to give kids some opportunity for application and transfer. But as students get more comfortable and as teachers get more comfortable facilitating this work, then you can begin to expand the time frame, make the projects more multidisciplinary, and give kids more control so that the projects increasingly become student directed. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I also want to,
if I can build on that just a second, I agree with you. And if I go back into the ancient days when I was the one in my classroom trying to figure this out, I felt really good about myself when I could create something that I thought was engaging, a performance. I used to call them products, but those are very similar. The thinking behind them is probably slightly different now, but nonetheless, something that a student can do with what they've learned to demonstrate their understanding as well as their skill aligned together with that. And one of the steps for me, in addition to the one you're talking about, which is start with something small and then begin to give students more choice in making them, was to say, here's something I have in mind for you to do. These are what you would say, here's the essential knowledge, understanding, and skill you need to show that you understand, have mastered, can take away from here and put to work. This is my idea for how to do it. If you have a different idea, come talk to me about it and let's figure it out. So I didn't even really, in the beginning, I think there was a stage in there for me where it was, let's all do this one. I don't know that I know how to come up with other ideas, but if you can help me, we'll do it. And really, in a lot of ways, then the kids taught me, oh, well, he had this idea, and next time I could build that one in. So I like your idea of the stepwise sort of system, which is a growth system for a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I also would like to say, I know Carolyn Marchetti put it in the chat. You guys that are here, obviously you care a lot about differentiation and PBL. Join our Facebook group. If you just go to Facebook and look for Defined Champions, we'll have to invite you, but just go sign up. We have right now about 250 people. It started with people who spent a week at camp doing a deep dive into defined learning, differentiation, and PBL, and has grown to other people that care. We have monthly Zoom calls and post lots of things. You can talk to other educators who are implementing this and who can answer your questions about how this works every day in their classroom. So please join us with that. Other people were asking, when can you start PBL? PBL can start with pre-K. Defined Learning has those PBLs that begin with students as young as pre-K.
Cindy, can I address a
Sure.
comment or comment I think that Howard Horvath made on the Q&A box? He mentioned surface gaps when I'm talking about the importance of understanding holes in students' learning. Jay would talk about that in part, looking for students' misconceptions, but also missed moments in learning a skill. And he said those surface gaps turn into deep gaps that ultimately transform the child. And I think that's really very important when kids get behind. If we don't do something to go backwards to help them be able to go forward more smoothly, which means we have to go forward at the same time, or all we're doing is remediating. And that student does become somebody who feels hopeless about himself and angry about the system. But Howard also made a comment beneath that, a time-based system versus a competency-based system seems to allow kids to be able to move forward as they're working to fill those gaps. And I think that's one of the things that Jay and I talk about often in regard to things that we'd like to see us improve a bit in our schools. And that is, I have to cover all this. I have to cover all this by this time. I have to cover all of this by this time. And if somebody's not on the train with me, I'm just really sorry, but I'm already stressed and I can't do anything else about it. So even if your school has a time-based competency system, I think your head does better if it says, I have a responsibility based system. And so I am going to teach backwards while I'm teaching forward. That's sort of where the exit ramps come from, so that there's a place for me to do that with kids who really need that. It does transform kids.
Yeah, and if I can jump back in, following Carol's remark, here's an analogy that I found useful, so I'll put it out there. Think of a authentic performance task or project as akin to the game in athletics or the play in theater. Both of those things involve authentic performance, and the players or the drama club have to perform on their own. The coach's role, whether it's the theater coach or an athletic coach, has to take the players they have or the people in the drama club and work with them to get them ready for performance. And they have a performance-based teaching and assessment orientation. I've never heard a good athletic coach say, "Oh, Carol, I don't have time for those games. It takes all afternoon. How can I ever cover the playbook?" But you hear teachers say, "I don't have time for that project. I'll never be able to cover the content." With all respect to the challenge of teaching, and there's so much content to be addressed, I think our job is to uncover and engage students in learning to apply what they've learned to realistic situations. If we want to cover things, just talk faster in class. But that's likely to yield superficial and disconnected learning rather than deep learning and transfer. So think about that analogy, because the coaches and the extracurricular sponsors get it, but sometimes we forget it when we're in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, Jay. I coach cross-country basketball and track, and a lot of what I learned in the sports field, and I played French horn and was drum major. So what I learned in marching band and what I learned in athletics made me a better teacher for all those very things that you talk about. And I like to tell teachers, think about if you go to the Apple store or you go to Lowe's or Home Depot when they're doing do-it-yourself projects, people show up early, they stay late, they don't leave until they master it. That's what happens to our students when we give them really good when we give them problems worth solving, and we give them the resources and the infrastructure to be successful.
The other thing I want to say with what Jay said and what you were saying, Cindy, back to Howard's point, so I'd never quite thought of it until Jay said what he's saying. I said if your school has a time-based system, you need to develop a competency-based one. And Jay's analogy is exactly that. The athletic endeavor has a time-based system, and the drama performance has a time-based system. That curtain's going to go up Friday night, whether you're ready or not. But the coach keeps coming back and saying, okay, after that first performance, let's talk about what you can do better about the second performance, so that it continues to be the competency-based thing, even in the face of the time-based realities as well.
Correct. Okay, well, thank you guys all so much for being with us today. We understand the complexities and the pressures that you're facing right now, and we know that your students are lucky to have you because you took the time to be here today to learn, to improve, and to be better educators. And thank you, Carolyn and Jay, for all you've contributed to us and what you're continuing to contribute to those of us working hard to improve the quality of teaching and learning. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Take good care.
Bye now.
Bye.